Hi, everybody. Welcome to Friends Talk Money. I'm Pam Krueger, co-host of Money Track on public television and founder of WealthRamp.com.
I'm Richard Eisenberg, a personal finance writer and editor, and formerly the editor of the Money and Work channels for the PBS site for people over 50, nextavenue.org.
And I'm Terry Savage, nationally syndicated personal finance columnist and the author of The Savage Truth on Money.
We're three friends who like to talk money and all the issues that come with it.
On this podcast, we're trying to help you understand your personal finances
to get you and your retirement on the right path for true financial peace of mind.
Hi, everybody. You know, Medicare's rules can be pretty tricky when it comes to what it does and doesn't cover for people 65 and older. But today we're going to tell you what you need to know for two types of health issues: treating Alzheimer's and helping with weight loss. I wrote about both of those topics recently for Fortune's website, and I talked to some smarties who explained all the ins and outs. It turns out there's really some big news about Medicare and Alzheimer's treatments, and that's affecting millions of Americans who are living with Alzheimer's disease and their families. So why don't we start there? The news here is that just this week, the FDA granted full approval for a new Alzheimer's drug that slows the progression of Alzheimer's for people with mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia with what are known as amyloid plaques. The drug is called Leqembi, and it's an infusion therapy. So what this means for people who will be prescribed Leqembi is that Medicare will now cover 80% of its cost. Medicare beneficiaries will pay the other 20%. This is a really big deal, but there's one problem. The list price of Leqembi will be about $26,500 a year. I'm sorry, I just got my tongue tied because I just can't believe how much it costs. $26,500. Yeah. Even paying 20% could be out of reach for a lot of people. That could run them more than $5,000 a year. And experts I've talked to say that there are other costs in addition to that. So before we go into the details, I'm wondering, Terry and Pam, do you have any thoughts just about this news? Terry?
Well, let me stick to the financial side. Yes, the question has not been answered yet. First of all, that 20% is the copay that most of your Medicare supplements, if you have not Advantage, but traditional Medicare with a supplement, will pay that portion. But that has not, we haven't seen so far anyway, a public reaction by the companies that provide Medicare supplements. Now, let's just sort this out. First of all, this is a Part B Medicare expense. We call it a drug, and yay, a drug for Alzheimer's, and hallelujah. But it actually comes under Part B because, as you mentioned, Richard, it's an infusion and it's given in a hospital setting. So it comes under Part B. Now, if I take you back just a little bit, there was a previous expensive drug, help me with it, Aduhelm, that was planning, they were planning to cover for 2022 in 2022. And then the government said, no, we're not going to cover that drug. But in anticipation of that drug, it was anticipated that 2022 Medicare premiums would rise sharply because that was a multi-billion-dollar potential cost. Well, they did away with that. But now it's expected that when this new drug, Leqembi, comes out, it could cost $5 billion. So you may remember that last year, your Medicare Part B premium astoundingly even dropped a little because they had been planning for the high cost of that other drug. Now you can plan that even though the great burden of this cost falls on the people who use the drug, or at least 20% if the supplement doesn't cover it, or if your Advantage plan may not cover that, okay? But now the burden will fall on every single person who pays a Medicare Part B premium, and you can expect for 2024 a significant increase. It's $5 billion that wasn't planned for Medicare spending. Yeah. So we'll all pay for it. But, you know, I don't know how you price the value of fixing Alzheimer's or getting it stopped early. That's amazing.
It's a really, really, really good point. You know, so the FDA has just fully approved the drug, the Leqembi drug, which is really, I was kind of surprised by that. And there's like 6 million people in the US diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So some number, they say probably a few 100,000 people will be able to access the drug and actually get that help, which is fantastic. But in terms of Medicare, Terry, what you were just saying, and Richard, about out-of-pocket costs, the two things that pop up for me in my mind and wonder if the treatment could even exceed the 26,500, because that's not a fixed price, is that, you know, the drug requires more than just, it's not popping a pill, you know, it's an infusion treatment. And secondly, you've got to have regular screenings to find out, you know, that your brain isn't swelling and things like that. And because it is so new, think about this, you may even have a tough time finding a doctor who is comfortable prescribing Leqembi because it is a treatment. So those two factors might add to the cost of this treatment. So, you know, as far as this early Alzheimer's treatment is going and what it's going to cost you out of pocket, if you have that gap insurance or that supplemental plan that Terry was just mentioning, then you know that everything will be in the fine print. But I have to tell you something, just this morning, I called, you know, because how the gap insurance will, supplements will vary state to state. I called our local, I'm here in Massachusetts. So I called and I asked them if they are going to cover this drug. And they said that the rule for this supplemental insurance is, and it's very similar to many states, is they have to follow whatever Medicare fully covers. So whatever, there goes Medicare, that's what they have to do as well. So that's good news as far as, like, you know, what's the likelihood that your supplemental insurance, but it just depends on which supplemental insurance you have.
You know, one more thing I would say about Leqembi is some of the doctors who study the data about how it works have raised some concerns about its safety. Yes, it has slowed the progression of Alzheimer's disease for certain people, but there's also been some possible brain swelling and brain bleeding for some people who are in the clinical trial for that, on top of the cost. So some doctors are a little skeptical at the moment about the risks compared to the benefits, but a lot of people who, you know, are living with loved ones, have loved ones with Alzheimer's, feel like it's a risk that they're willing to take if they can do something to slow the progression of the disease. And as far as Aduhelm, the other drug that Terry was mentioning, that also is a very expensive drug. That also has a list price in that same vicinity. This is about $28,200 a year. And in that case, Medicare says they'll cover it, but only for beneficiaries who are in a clinical trial that was either approved by the agency or the National Institutes of Health. So not everybody who wants to get Aduhelm can get that. And just as Pam was saying, it can be hard to find a healthcare provider that will administer Aduhelm. There are already some big ones that have already said, we're not going to do it because we're concerned about this. So there are, you know, a lot of issues here. I think it's great that there are these new promising drugs that may be helpful for people. And I'm glad that Medicare says that they're going to cover a good chunk of it for some people. But there are a lot of wrinkles, a lot of fine print there.
I just want to add, this is going to get, it shouldn't be, but I bet you it gets caught up in politics in the year ahead, because the $5 billion cost is actually added to the, you hate to hear this, the federal budget deficit. This argument started a year ago with Aduhelm. As I recall, the FDA approved it first, but then Medicare said it wasn't going to cover it. That's never happened before. It was just Medicare would cover anything the FDA approved. So that's why we come to this new drug where it looks like you get the immediate FDA approval and Medicare not dancing around. But the reason, there are some saying that the reason they danced around a year ago was because the unforeseen costs to the government and how would they recoup them. So I know it's right now a Democratic administration, and you tend to think that they're going to pay for all these things more likely without worrying about the financial consequences. But we're talking about $5 billion here. So we hope this works. We hope that, you know, that if it works for you, wouldn't that be great, or anybody you know and love? But every single one of you, and we think our audience is largely people who probably are at this stage on Medicare. I want you to budget for a significant increase in your Part B premiums, because they're going to spread the cost over all Medicare Part B recipients, which is like everybody.
Yeah.
You know, when I was doing reporting for this, I asked some experts, you know, what about the cost to Medicare, and is that a reason enough for Medicare to maybe not cover it or be more limiting on that? And what I was told was basically Medicare is not allowed to deny coverage because of cost. Now, I think it probably is in discussion in the halls of the people who run Medicare. And I know, as you say, Terry, we're going to hear a lot about it in Washington, but they weren't allowed to say we're not going to cover it because it's going to be too expensive for Medicare, even if they may believe that.
Well, they would have found another way.
Yeah, they did.
Now, there are a few other medications that treat cognitive symptoms of Alzheimer's. They don't slow the progression the way these two do. But if you have a Medicare Part D prescription drug plan, you can get Medicare coverage for these if you have Alzheimer's or a loved one does. And those are for it's for mild to moderate stages of Alzheimer's. Those are drugs that are called Aricept, Exelon, and Razodine. And then for people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's, these drugs are called Namenda and Namzara. But as I say, the big difference here is those drugs are not going to slow the progression. All they're going to do is try to help treat the symptoms, and whether they work or not is still up in the air. I guess I wonder, before we move on, do you have any other thoughts, Terry and Pam, about Medicare covering these types of drugs, or even advice for people whose loved ones have Alzheimer's, what they should be thinking about and doing about this?
I want to say something about this, Richard. This is a huge class of potential beneficiaries of these new drugs. And somebody out there, along with me, when we were talking about these numbers, was thinking, yeah, but wait, shouldn't the drug price itself come down when when they can mass produce these infusions, when there's so much demand for it? That's an interesting fact of the drug industry, of Medicare's ability to negotiate on price, which has been a controversial topic as well.
Right.
But I think that will bring that financial issue to a head. Yes, we want our drug companies to spend a lot of money in R&D and keep coming up with things like this, and or Ozempic if it came to everybody getting to lose weight. We want them to invest in R&D. I get that completely. We also hope that we will figure out a way, since this will have so much attention paid to it. When you think about it, most of the other very high cost drugs and treatments are high cost and are limited to a relatively few people who suffer from this rare disease or rare
That's right.
issue. But now we're going to have everybody potentially over, in their 60, 65 at least, over thinking about, what if it happened to me or my loved one?
Yeah.
And so maybe going forward, we will see a different kind of pricing adjustment, given there'll be high volumes of demand, assuming it works.
You mean smarter planning?
Well, that's an oxymoron, Pam, especially at Medicare. But sorry, I'm going to get hit for that. But what I'm saying is, I think this is such a big thing, and it appears to make such a big difference. And there's going to be so much demand, and the cost is so high that they ought to be able to recoup their R&D investment. And I hope that if we talk about this a year, 2 years from now, you'll see that cost has come down a lot, or they've come up with another delivery way. This is a huge advance.
Yeah. Couple of thoughts I have. First of all, can they change the names of these drugs so we can pronounce
please
them? Why can't they just call it Alzheimer's, whatever?
Yes.
Anyway, that's the other point I want to make, is that, I want to celebrate the fact that this is such a great development. It's really huge that now there's a drug that can help slow down the progression of Alzheimer's. It's a heartbreaking disease. And for you, your loved ones, everybody who's touched it knows that. And now Medicare is fully on board. Just know that you'll have to do a little, what I call a little medical financial planning to make sure that supplement is going to cover you. Because when I made that call earlier this morning, I used myself as an example, my older self as an example. It would cost me less than $300 a year. So, that's the good news. It's just that you have to figure out if your own insurance will actually follow the Medicare. So there's a little medical financial planning.
One more thought here, and I have no idea how this will work out, because this is all literally just happening this week. Medicare, we've done a bunch of shows. I've got another one lined up for you this fall when it comes time for Medicare sign-up season, because I always concern people don't understand those wonderful ads for Medicare Advantage. We're going to pay for everything. We might even put money back in your Social Security check, because we don't go there. But one of the things Advantage plans are famous for is limiting access to physicians particularly, or testing and so forth.
Yeah.
I think this will be another thing that pops up like a pimple that's going to burst. Is will the Advantage plans be able to cover these treatments? It's because they get a fixed reimbursement from the government.
Yeah.
There are going to be a lot of headlines this fall, but it may be one reason, if you're thinking about it and you can still get into a good supplement, that you want to take the supplement. Again, this is not Part D, it's not a drug. So right now it's part of traditional Medicare that Advantage does cover, but we don't know what the limitations will be on whether they will cover this infusion.
We're going to stay tuned on that one.
Well, no, I think you raise a good point, Terry, that it's a question that if you're either in a Medicare Advantage plan or thinking about going to one, when it's time to sign up, you want to ask the plan, well, by the way, what's your ruling about these new Alzheimer's drugs? You know, do you cover those or not? And how hard is it for me to get a doctor to do it? And see what they say. It's an important thing to ask. So let's switch gears radically and talk about weight loss, because that's another tricky area for Medicare. And I should say here, it's really about Medicare's lack of coverage, because Medicare does not cover drugs for weight loss. And the reason is, years ago, Congress passed a law that said it could not, Medicare cannot pay for drugs to help people lose weight. Now, maybe, Terry, do you remember what happened? It came out of a drug called Fen-Phen. Do you remember the Fen-Phen?
Oh gosh, yes, it was all the rage, and it had
Wasn't that like a diet pill or something?
Yeah, a supplement.
It was a supplement, and it was like all the rage, and I can't remember specifically, but I was not sure that it was FDA approved. I think it was a supplement, and it had all kinds of, I'm talking just from long memory. But the interesting thing is now, and I know you're leading there, so I'll just toss this balloon up in the air. We know that a lot of diseases that impact seniors have a lot to do with weight. It has to do with heart conditions, breathing, COPD, diabetes, and so forth. So now out comes a drug that was used, what was it, psoriasis, Ozempic, or was it?
So drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, Mounjaro, these are drugs that were really diagnosed for diabetes. But they have an extra component, which is many people on them lose weight. And so what's been happening is a lot of people are starting to take these drugs to lose weight who don't have diabetes, and they're happy that they're losing weight, but Medicare will not cover that for losing weight. They'll cover it for if you're taking it for your diabetes, but not if you're taking it to lose weight. And so that's really the big issue. Now, in the meantime, Medicare does cover other ways people can lose weight, like bariatric surgery. If you're diagnosed that you need that because you're obese and your doctor says you should have it, they will cover that, but they won't cover pills. And so right now, you can't get Medicare to pay for this, even if it's going to help you lose weight and be healthier. Pam, any thoughts about this and the struggle people have?
Yeah, back to the cost. It always comes back to the money. Knowing that Medicare is not showing any signs of wanting to pay for weight loss drugs. My understanding is they've always looked at it like that's a lifestyle. That's a lifestyle issue more. But they
can blame Congress, and they can say, well, we'd love to, but we can't.
Yeah, and they'll pay for the preventative, or they'll pay for some behavioral, and like you said, they'll pay for the surgery. But the fact right now is that, losing weight is, really expensive as an individual on your own, struggling, for medical reasons, and you have obesity and you're really struggling as far as financially. I mean, it's really difficult. There's millions of people frustrated, struggling with trying to figure out, how can Medicare help and what can they take advantage of? But, it's just so limited. But I know that in the instance of preparing for surgery, then if the doctor says that the services or whatever it is, screenings are mandatory before a surgery, then, that's one of those loophole things. But again, it's probably Medicare supplements are not going to be very helpful there either, but maybe differently, Terry, about any supplements that are better for helping people lose excess weight.
Well, okay. So, thank God for Google. You asked me about Fen-Phen. I really did remember that. It was the 1990s, and it was a combo drug, that fenfluramine and dexafen and so forth. But they were prescribed. They were made by Wyeth Labs. It doesn't say here that they were FDA approved beforehand. But the FDA in September 1997 called on the manufacturer Wyeth, and there was a huge class action suit and settlement, to remove the drugs because they had clearly linked Wyeth's drugs to heart and lung damage and a whole long list of things.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing anything in my quick on the hand research about whether Medicare covered it then. We have, I think, in the wake of the COVID vaccinations, we have a different kind of FDA. Now we have an FDA that I think is a lot more cautious and about approving and more aggressive about dealing with unapproved things that claim to have medical benefits. And I'm not sure that we would have that kind of a thing again, but this Ozempic thing, I mean, it's Kim Kardashian et al. It's Hollywood taking this drug. So we're in an era now, I think, that we weren't in the 90s, when I can sing, I think, some of the songs that advertise all kinds of drugs for your skin and for psoriasis and for diabetes. I mean, we have names on TV commercials that we never knew or saw in the 90s. So what's happened is the drugs and the alleged benefits of them, or the advertised benefits, I should say, are coming to you at the same time they're coming to your doctor. I mean, you don't have to wait to have a very forward-looking doctor to be researching all these things. It's on your evening news that you should be asking your doctor about it. So now we're confronted with a whole different set of rules and regulations about, number one, approval. Number two, insurance coverage, okay, when it's borderline, and particularly of interest to our audience, Medicare coverage. Richard, what do you think is going to happen with Ozempic et al.?
You know, it's interesting. The people I talk to for my reporting are saying to me that there's a lot of pressure right now on Congress to change the law to allow Medicare to cover drugs that people take for weight loss if it's proven to help people lose weight. Now, it's not happened yet, but these are big drug makers and they're pretty powerful in Washington. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was a law change that allowed Medicare to cover, at least to cover in some cases, these drugs. But the one big stumbling block, I think, here is cost to Medicare. And we go back to what we were talking about before with the Alzheimer's drugs. A lot of people want to lose weight. And if people start taking the drugs like Wegovy in big numbers, as they might, particularly if Medicare were to cover it, it could really be expensive. The number I saw was that if 10% of people on Medicare with obesity use Wegovy, the annual cost to Medicare could be between $13.6 billion and $26.8 billion. And that was in the New England Journal of Medicine. So that is huge. By comparison, the total Medicare Part D spending overall is $98 billion. So you can see how expensive this is and how crippling it could be for Medicare. And that's, I think, probably the main reason why we haven't seen that law changed yet, but I would not rule it out.
We are finally coming down to that moment in dystopian futuristic novels where we either ration healthcare by availability, or perhaps by price, or perhaps by insurance coverage. We sit here with all these wonderful new advances. On the other hand, we gave away COVID vaccines for free. Think about it. And the government clearly negotiated, I mean, the cost of those new kinds of NDA molecule treatments. They negotiated that down when it impacted the vast, almost every American
deadline,
health potentially.
Deadline, yeah.
So what I hold out hope for, I mean, where's Henry Ford when we need him? You know, the first car was a very expensive thing compared to a horse and buggy. So what I hold out hope for is now that our discoveries are becoming so broadly applicable, so widely understood through advertising, and there's Google for you, and therefore creates so much demand, and with among such a broad set of people, not just rare diseases, this is stuff that impacts everybody, that maybe there will be a breakthrough, not so much as much as in the drugs themselves, but in the production and cost of them and the cost of distributing them. And the only example I can give you was the COVID vaccine. That cost a fortune. I never heard anybody break out the cost of doing that because it was
Mhm.
compared to the cost of not doing it.
Yeah.
Right, that's
Uh,
right.
But I would say that, when people take drugs for weight loss or do something about weight loss, not only are they doing it because they want to feel better and look better, but it's actually in many cases very helpful for their overall health in many
Oh,
ways.
yeah.
So,
Most of the time, I think,
so these prescriptions, these drugs may be helping people get healthier overall and perhaps save money for the
preventative.
hospitals and the healthcare industry overall too, because fewer people will be in the hospital because they are having conditions that come with being overweight. Pam,
Yeah.
any thoughts?
No, I know a couple of people that have been on these drugs and
Uh-huh.
have lost weight, and I really feel like the only thing, this has nothing to do with money.
Yeah.
They're paying for that out of pocket, of course. I wonder how hard it's going to be to get off of that. Like, when do you go off of
Yeah.
it? Hello,
Right.
Kardashians, whatever. When do you go off of this thing, and what happens when you do? And it tells you right there, when you do, you're gonna gain weight.
Right. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
anyway,
It
on that
does.
note,
All right.
okay.
Well, that is the skinny about Medicare and weight loss
Oh no,
drugs.
you did not say that.
And the news about coverage for Alzheimer's treatments, which is very serious, obviously.
Yes.
But we wanted to talk about it because these are in the news, but they're also things that affect a lot of our audience. We want you to know, and we want to cover it. And we'll come back to this if there are new developments, as I expect there probably will be over the next year or two. So
Yeah.
thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Friends Talk Money.
Friends Talk Money is funded in part by a grant from the Investor Protection Trust. The IPT is a nonprofit organization devoted to investor education. Since 1993, the IPT has worked with the states to provide the independent, objective investor education needed by all Americans to make informed investment decisions. Visit investorprotection.org. We also receive support from the North American Securities Administrators Association, known as NASA. It's the oldest international investor protection organization. NASA's members include state and provincial securities regulators from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico who serve on the front lines of investor protection. Recognizing that education and awareness are powerful tools in the fight against investment fraud, NASA is pleased to sponsor Friends Talk Money. Here are 3 important tips to help you protect your money from fraud. With investing, there are always risks, so be cautious of anybody telling you that a certain investment is guaranteed. You should also proceed with caution if somebody is promising very large investment returns. This is a common red flag for investment fraud. Last and most importantly, be sure you're working with a licensed or registered financial professional. You can check your advisor and make sure they're licensed by visiting brokercheck.finra.org. NASA is your partner in keeping you safe and helping you avoid investment frauds. Visit nasa.org and click on the Investor Education tab to learn more.